Françoise-Athénaïs de Rochechouart de Mortemart, Marquise of Montespan, better known as Madame de Montespan, was the most celebrated Maîtresse-en-titre of King Louis XIV of France, by whom she had 7 children. Born into one of the oldest noble families of France, the House of Rochechouart, Madame de Montespan was called by some the true Queen of France during her romantic relationship with Louis XIV due to the pervasiveness of her influence at court during that time. Her so-called reign lasted from around 1667, when she first danced with Louis XIV at a ball hosted by the king's younger brother, Philippe I, Duke of Orléans, at the Louvre Palace, until her alleged involvement in the notorious Affaire des Poisons in the late 1670s to 1680s. Her immediate contemporary was Barbara Villiers, mistress of King Charles II of England. She is an ancestress of several royal houses in Europe, including those of Spain, Italy, Bulgaria and Portugal. Early life. Françoise de Rochechouart de Mortemart was born on 5 October 1640 and baptized the same day at the Château of Lussac-les Châteaux in today's Vienne department, in the Poitou-Charentes region in France. Françoise, or more formally, Mme de Tonnay-Charente, possessed the blood of 2 of the oldest noble families of France through her parents, Gabriel de Rochechouart, Duke of Mortemart, Prince of Tonnay-Charente, and Diane de Grandcine, a lady-in-waiting to Anne of Austria, Queen Consort of France. From her father she inherited the famous Mortemart esprit. As a young girl, she often traveled with her mother between the family estates and the court at the Louvre in Paris. At the age of 12, she began her formal education at the convent of St. Mary at Saints, where her sister Gabrielle had started hers almost a decade earlier. She was very religious and took communion once a week, a practice that she would continue as a young woman. Her siblings were Gabrielle, who married Claude Léonard d'Armas de Thienches, Marquis of Thienches, and had children. Louis Victor, known as the Marquis of Vivonne, who was an enfant d'honneur and a friend of Louis XIV of France in his youth. Marie-Madeleine Gabrielle Adélaïde, who due to her relationship with Françoise-Athénaïs was known as the Queen of Abbesses. At the age of 20, Françoise-Athénaïs became a maid of honor to the king's sister-in-law, Princess Henrietta Anne of England, who was known at court by the traditional honorific of Madame. Later, because of the relationship between her mother and the Queen Dowager Anne of Austria, Françoise-Athénaïs was appointed to be a lady-in-waiting to the king's wife, Maria Theresa of Spain. Marriage on 28 January 1663. Françoise married Louis Henry de Pardelle de Gondrine, Marquis of Montespan, who was 1 year her junior. Madame de Lafayette says in her Histoire de Madame Henriette d'Angleterre that Françoise-Athénaïs was in love with another young man, Louis de La Trémorial, who was the elder son and heir to the Duc de Nemours. However, La Trémorial had to flee to Spain after a disastrous duel, and Françoise-Athénaïs was betrothed to Montespan. The wedding ceremony took place in a chapel at the Église Saint-Eustache in Paris. Françoise later recounted that as she had neglected to bring along the proper kneeling cushions for the ceremony, the couple had to kneel on dog cushions. She soon became pregnant with her first child, Christine. 2 weeks after her daughter's birth she danced in a court ballet, and less than a year later her second child was born. The Montespan children were Marie-Christine de Pardelle and de Gondrine, who died at the Château de Bonifant, one of her father's castles in Gascony. Louis-Antoine de Pardelle and de Gondrine, Marquis of Antin, later Duke of Antin. Louis-Antoine had a cordial relationship with his younger half-brothers, the Duke of Maine and the Count of Toulouse. The couple lived in a small house close to the Louvre, which allowed Madame de Montespan to attend court and carry out her duties there as a lady-in-waiting to the Duchess of Orléans. She quickly established herself as the reigning beauty of the court. Beauty, however, was only one of Madame de Montespan's many charms. She was a cultured and amusing conversationalist, who won the admiration of such literary figures as letter writer Madame de Sévigné and diarist Saint-Simon. In addition, she kept abreast of political events. This had the effect of making her even more appealing to men of intellect and power. She was courted by a number of suitors including Le Comte de Frontenac and Marquis de Affaire. Rise as Maîtresse-en-titre, Madame de Montespan astounded the court by openly resenting the position of Queen Maria Theresa of Spain, the daughter of King Philip IV of Spain and Elizabeth de France. The Queen's Spanish title, before her marriage, was Infanta Maria Theresa de Austria. In France, she was known as Marie-Thérèse d'Autriche. A scandal arose when the Duchess of Montausier, governess of the royal children and lady-in-waiting to the Queen, was accused of acting as a go-between in order to secure the governorship of the Dauphin for her husband, the Duke of Montausier. By 1666, Madame de Montespan was trying to take the place of Louis XIV's current mistress, Louise de la Vallière. Using her wit and charm, she sought to ingratiate herself with the king. She also became close to the Dauphin, whose affection for her never wavered, even though Louise de la Vallière knew that Montespan was trying to conquer the king's heart, and reportedly laughed at her miserable efforts. She definitely underestimated her new rival. Montespan cleverly cultivated friendships with both Louise and Queen Maria Theresa, and when both ladies were pregnant, Madame de Montespan was asked to help them entertain the king during private dinners. Soon they regretted the decision, for Montespan now cultivated an intimate relationship with the king. Shortly after, Louise's position was diminished to second place. To conceal his new relationship, the king placed the ladies in connected rooms they had to share, so he could have access to both. Later, humiliated Louise joined a convent and the spotlight belonged now to the 25-year-old Athénaïs de Montespan. She also became friends at court with another lady-in-waiting to the Queen, Louise Boyer, the wife of Anne, Duke of Noailles. Montespan's youngest son, the Count of Toulouse, would later marry one of Boyer's granddaughters. Illegitimate children. The first of Madame de Montespan's 7 children with the king was born in 1669. The newborn child, a girl, is thought to have been named Louise Françoise. The upbringing of this first child was entrusted to one of Madame de Montespan's friends, Madame Scarron. A son, Louis Auguste, was born in 1670. When the third child, Louis Auguste, was born in 1672, a house was purchased for Scarron and the children on the Rue Voiron. In 1673, the couple's 3 living illegitimate children were legitimated by Louis XIV and given the royal surname of de Bourbon. The mother's name, however, was not mentioned in the legitimization documents, as Madame de Montespan was still married to her husband. If the maternal parentage had been revealed, the Marquis could have legally claimed Madame de Montespan's illegitimate children with the king as his own. The eldest, a son, Louis Auguste de Bourbon, became the Duc du Maine. The second child, a son, Louis Auguste de Bourbon, became the Comte de Vexin, and the third, a daughter, Louise Françoise de Bourbon, became Mademoiselle de Nanton in 1685, married the son of the head of the House of Condé, a cadet branch of the reigning House of Bourbon. As Madame de Montespan spent the majority of her time immersed in the social whirl of the court, the 3 had little contact with the busy mother and spent most of their childhood with their governess, Madame Scarron. In 1674, an official separation with her husband was declared by the Procureur Général Achille de Harlay, assisted by 6 judges at the Châtelet. Due to her role in royal adultery, the Roman Catholic Church soon became her adversary. In 1675, the priest Lecaille refused to give her absolution, which was necessary for her to take Easter Communion, a requisite for all Catholics. Father Lecaille raged, "Is this the madam that scandalizes all France? Go abandon your shocking life and then come throw yourself at the feet of the ministers of Jesus Christ." The king appealed to the priest's superiors, but the church refused to yield to the king's demands. After a short separation, the king and Madame de Montespan resumed the relationship, resulting in the birth of 2 more children, Françoise Marie de Bourbon, Mademoiselle de Blois, in 1677, and Louis Alexandre de Bourbon, Comte de Toulouse, in 1678. Both were to be legitimized in 1681. Royal scandal and fall. Affaire des Poisons. The Affaire des Poisons, which erupted in September 1677, was to be the beginning of the end of the reign of La Montespan. Suspicion that Madame de Montespan might be capable of murder or worse began when the king's eye strayed to another beauty, the Duchess of Fontanges. Madame de Montespan's relegation to the position of superintendent of the Queen's household as a result brought matters to a head. Before any further developments in her romance with the king could occur, Mlle de Fontanges died in 1681. Many at the time suspected that she had been poisoned by her rival, although none could prove it. It is now believed that Mlle de Fontanges died from natural causes. Long assumed to have been involved in the infamous Affaire des Poisons, Madame de Montespan has never been conclusively implicated. Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynière, Paris's first lieutenant general of police and the chief judge of the court, before whom the famous poisoning cases were brought, had testimony that placed Madame de Montespan's first visits to the so-called witch Catherine Monvoisin, known as La Voisin, in 1665. According to this testimony, they repeatedly carried out rituals that would create a special potion for the king. The witch and the Madame de Montespan would call on the devil, and pray to him for the king's love. As a way to express her gratitude for her request, they sacrificed a newborn's life by slitting its throat with a knife. Next, the baby's body would be crushed, and the drained blood and mashed bones would be used in the mixture. Louis's food was tainted in this way for almost 13 years, until the witch was captured after a police investigation where they uncovered the remains of 2,500 infants in La Voisin's garden, even though no evidence that the garden search ever actually happened are found. In 1666, Madame de Montespan supposedly went so far as to allow a priest, Etienne Guiberg, to perform a black mass over her nude body in a blood-soaked ceremony, which was also said to have included infant sacrifice. Whatever the truth in these allegations, in July 1667, Madame de Montespan became the king's new mistress even though Louis was carrying his child. Louis de Bourbon, Comte de Vermandois. In addition to seeking Louis's love, some charged Madame de Montespan with also conspiring to kill him. But inconsistencies in this testimony suggest that the royal mistress was innocent of these charges. However, suspicion was thrown onto Madame de Montespan because the name of her maid, Mlle de Sir-Ilaise, was frequently mentioned in connection with La Voisin in the evidence brought before the Chamber Ardente. Indeed, if anyone was attempting to kill the king, it was more likely Claude de Vendésiles, who had an illegitimate child fathered but not publicly acknowledged by Louis. Presumably, the maid resented the loss of Louis's attention. Olympia Mancini, Countess of Soissons, herself a former mistress of the king and well-known intrigante, was also implicated in the conspiracy. For the end of 1680 onwards, Louvois, Jean-Baptiste Colbert and Madame de Maintenon all helped to hush up the affair in order to prevent further scandal about the mother of the king's legitimized children. Concerning the king's need to avoid shocking scandal, Police Chief Le Reynier said, "The enormity of the crimes proved their safeguard." Exile. Even after the scandal had forced Louis XIV and Madame de Montespan apart, the king continued to visit her daily in her rooms at the palace. Apparently her brilliance, charm, and spirited conversation mitigated to some extent her reduced status as a discarded mistress. In 1691, no longer in royal favor, Madame de Montespan retired to the Filles de Saint-Joseph convent in the Rue Saint-Dominique in Paris, with a pension of £500,000. In gratitude for her departure, the king made her father the governor of Paris, her brother, the Duc de Vivonne, a marshal of France, and one of her sisters, Gabrielle, whose vows were only 4 years old, the abbess of the wealthy Fontevraud Abbey. Gabrielle was appointed abbess in 1670, and it is said that her beauty, her wit and her knowledge surpassed by far Athenic qualities. The king wanted her to stay longer times at court, but Gabrielle always declined and stayed only for very short times. In her long retirement, Madame de Montespan donated vast sums to hospitals and charities. She was also a generous patron of the arts and letters, and befriended Corneille, Racine and La Fontaine. Later life, death. The last years of Madame de Montespan's life were given up to a very severe penance. Real sorrow over her death was felt by her 3 youngest children. She died on the 27th of May 1707 at the age of 65 while taking the waters at Bourbon-la-Chambeau in order to try to heal an illness. The king forbade her children to wear mourning for her appearance and personality. Athénaïs was considered astonishingly beautiful by the standards of her time. She had large blue eyes, long, thick corn-colored hair that fell in curls about her shoulders, and a curvaceous, voluptuous body. She was droll, amusing, and used her considerable wit to mock others. She also had an extravagant and demanding nature, and possessed enough charm to get what she wanted. She was expensive and glorious, like the Palace of Versailles itself. Her apartments were filled with pet animals and thousands of flowers. She had a private gallery, and costly jewels were showered upon her. She was highly discriminating as regards to the quality of the gems, returning them if they did not meet her exacting standards. She was given the nickname Quantou. Her love for food and her numerous pregnancies caused her to gain weight in her late 30s until her pleasingly plump figure became undesirably fat. Children by Louis XIV. Louis XIV and Madame de Montespan had 7 children, only 4 of whom survived childhood. Louise Françoise de Bourbon. She was the first child to be placed in the care of the future Madame de Maintenon. Louis Auguste de Bourbon, legitimized in December 1673, and given the title of Duke of Maine, married Anne-Louise Benedicte de Bourbon, had issue but no surviving descendants, was also the founder of the House of Bourbon-Maine, inherited the Château de Clagny. Louis Cécutessard de Bourbon, made Count of Vexin, Abbot of Saint-Germain-des-Prés. Louise Françoise de Bourbon, named after Louise de la Vallière, her mother's predecessor as Louis XIV's official mistress. La Vallière was also her godmother, legitimized in 1673. Given the title of Mademoiselle de Nantes after her legitimization, married Louis III, Prince of Condé. Upon her marriage, she assumed the title of Duchess de Bourbon and later Princesse de Condé. The present members of the House of Orléans are descended from Louise Françoise through her daughter Louise Elizabeth de Bourbon. The Palais Bourbon in Paris was built for her. Louise Marie Anne de Bourbon legitimized in January 1676, given the title of Mademoiselle de Tours. Françoise-Marie de Bourbon legitimized in 1681, given the title of Mademoiselle de Blois, holding it until her marriage. Married the future regent Philippe II, Duke of Orléans in 1692. Through her son, Françoise-Marie became a direct ancestor of Louis Philippe I, King of the French and the modern House of Orléans. Louis Alexandre de Bourbon legitimized in 1681, given the title of Count of Toulouse. Married Marie Victoire de Noailles. The modern House of Orléans is also related to him through his granddaughter Louise Marie Adélaïde de Bourbon, who married Philippe Égalité. He founded the House of Bourbon-Toulouse, which with his son became the House of Bourbon-Penthève, owned the Hôtel de Toulouse in Paris, today the seat of the Banque de France. Legacy. House of Orléans. Through three of her children, Madame de Montespan became an ancestor of the modern House of Orléans and its present head, Henry d'Orléans, Count of Paris and Duke of France. She is related to the present Portuguese and Brazilian royal House of Braganza, the House of Este, the House of Austria-Este and the House of Savoy, mainly through her granddaughter by Françoise-Marie de Bourbon, Charlotte Agla Acute d'Orléans. Françoise-Marie's great-great-grandson was Louis Philippe I, King of the French. Through Louis Philippe's eldest daughter, Louise Marie d'Orléans, the wife of King Leopold I of Belgium. Madame de Montespan is an ancestor of the present King of Belgium, Albert II, and his nephew, the present Grand Duke of Luxembourg, Henry. Through Louis Philippe's son Ferdinand Philippe, Duke of Orléans, she is also an ancestor of the Spanish royal family and its head, King Juan Carlos I of Spain. Through Louis Philippe's fourth daughter, Princess Clementine d'Orléans, the wife of Leopold's nephew, Prince Auguste of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. She is also the ancestor of the current pretender to the throne of Bulgaria, King Simeon II. Château de Clagny. The Château de Clagny in Versailles was built between 1674 and 1680 from the drawings of Jules Hardouin Mansart, premier architect Édouard, on land bought by Louis XIV in 1665. Madame de Sévigné wrote that its construction employed 1,200 workers and the cost was no less than 2 million livres. The royal gardener André Lenotre created the gardens, which looked west toward the much larger Palace of Versailles, of which Clagny was a smaller version. The Château de Clagny was also famed for its gallery. In 1685, Louis XIV gave the magnificent palace to Madame de Montespan. At her death, Clagny was inherited by her oldest son, the Duc du Maine, who, in turn, passed it on to his son, Louis Auguste de Bourbon, Prince de Dombes. The château reverted to the French crown in 1766 and was demolished in 1769. Trianon de porcelain. Louis XIV also had a pleasure pavilion called the Trianon de porcelain built for Madame de Montespan, and surrounded by gardens, on the site of the former hamlet of Trianon which he had purchased near the palaces of Versailles. It was meant as a hideaway for the couple. Because of the fragility of the earthenware tiles used in its construction, the Trianon de porcelain was demolished in 1687 and replaced by the Trianon of pink marble. Fashion at court. Women copied Madame de Montespan's lavish style of dress, which was often very loose and unfettered. The looseness allowed her to move more easily during her frequent pregnancies. Queen Marie-Thérèse d'Autriche unsuccessfully copied her coiffure in order to get the king to notice her more. Later, even after her departure from court, Madame de Montespan's favorite fashions were still being copied. Court as the king's official mistress. Madame de Montespan frequently joined the rest of the court as it escorted the king as he waged his many wars against the Dutch and Austrians. Below is a picture of one of the court processions. It shows Louis XIV and his wife, Queen Marie-Thérèse, in Arras in 1667 during the War of Devolution. Madame de Montespan is said to be the blonde woman at the center of the coach, which would have also held the king's sister-in-law Madame, his first cousin La Grande Mademoiselle, the Queen, and Madame de Montespan's older sister, the Marquise d'Athénaïs. Louis XIV stands behind the coach with his red hat, while his younger brother, Monsieur, stands further to the right in blue. Ancestry, titles, styles, honors and arms. The 5th of October 1641 to 28 January 1663, Mademoiselle de Mortemart to Mademoiselle de Tonnay-Charente. The 28th of January 1663, November 1702 to the Marchioness of Montespan. November 1702 to the 27th of May 1707, the Dowager Marchioness of Montespan.